Welcome to a video series called Why Love is Hard for You. In this video, I'm going to discuss how our first meaningful relationship that we had, the one with our parents, our most needy one as children, forms our attachment style into the future and becomes our go-to blueprint trying to find love later as adults. And also why we keep screwing up. Hey, welcome to my channel, where I give you my unprofessional opinion. Look, I know it's easy to dismiss our childhood and to leave it behind, but also, why do you think that experts keep referring to our childhood experiences as ways of explaining so much automatic behavior that we have now in our adult lives? Well, let's think about this logically. How much of who we are is formed as kids? Think about how much we soak in and learn when we're very young. How we can learn 7 languages and 3 instruments, science, mathematics, the alphabet, names of planets, animals, complex sequences, where the neuroplasticity of our mind accommodates as much as we can feed it, within reason and environment, of course, because the personality and mind window is quickly closing so that when our age gets into double digits, I'm talking about our teenage years, biology can then trust us to be fully formed enough to be released out into the world with the foundations set by our childhoods, and hopefully our families did a good job at setting us up, especially with regard to love and relating to other people. But what if what you think healthy love looks like based on your childhood experience was actually obedience, avoidance, or manipulation by your parents on you to get you to behave, or you on them to survive in the house? And sure, even if people in your family strategically played polite family games, the end result may have been a household that felt safe and people never fought, okay, but maybe only because you had to keep your mouth shut, or follow rules without question, or knew what buttons to push, how to manipulate siblings or parents, or maybe hid who you really were in order to be fed and have a warm bed to sleep in. And because it worked back then in childhood, nature says to us inside, look, you're still alive today, you survived, so it must have worked, so it must be correct. And so that's what we agree love and warmth looks like. And so we file it away in here as what love is, to be used later with people as we grow up. And then fast forward to growing up, and you're out there looking for someone to be with. And what do you think your instincts reach for when you want to relate to somebody? To feel safe and close to them. Really, think about the eggshells that you might walk on when you're on a date and the polite games that you might play. You see, on a date, you might feel you're just being nice and polite to Nancy sitting across from you. You may think you were brought up with manners, but you may just be being compliant and a little strategic. That is, using what works in this situation from your lessons in childhood. Whether it's flattering someone, compliments, jokes, avoiding directness, saying certain things to elicit an emotional response in order to keep Nancy smiling and happy and not disappointing her, just like what worked with mummy or daddy. And this is all subconscious. I'm not saying we're dumb enough or psychotic enough to be doing this willfully, but just think about how many intelligent, hyper-successful professional men or women out there are brilliant in their careers and then become complete imbeciles in love and relationships. And it's not just hormones. It's what familiar love feels like to you when you let go and just ride the wave of what clicks for you. It's like when you hear people talk about love at first sight, or, you know when you know. Yeah, well, sometimes you might just feel a familiar game playing that you've known all your life. Maybe the familiar grammar of childhood. It doesn't mean that what you're doing now in adulthood is healthy or correct. Now, if you like what you hear in this video, consider sharing this with someone you think it might interest. I know I could have used a conversation like this back when I felt I had no one to talk to. And finally, if you'd like to book my time for a private chat, join the channel, or say thanks with a donation or super chat, just links below. All right, let's get back to the video. So how useful is this exercise of looking back on our childhoods to see what love looked like back then? To see how it might be affecting what love looks like now to you in your screwed up love life. And I know a lot of this Freudian stuff about
tell me about your childhood
is questionable, but let's entertain the reasonable side of these things. Because for myself, I think, look, I don't believe in woo-woo garbage. I think it's nonsense. I'm not a stupid person. Objectively speaking, I know I'm not. I know the difference between right and wrong. I can laugh at myself. I can hold two opposing views at the same time without being a hypocrite. But when it comes to love and relationships, my results over the years suggest that either I'm fairly dumb at this, which again, I know I'm not stupid, or I've been going about love the wrong way, which makes much more sense to me because I've spoken and listened to far too many happy couples out there to realize it isn't all just luck and chance, but rather a skill that they seem to have perhaps naturally and I don't. But why didn't I have that skill naturally and they did? Was it nature or the way they were raised? That is, was it nurture? And so I began to listen to their backstories of how they were raised, before they met, way before they met, when they were kids, their nurture stories. And I paid attention to their parent-child dynamic of the love they had or didn't have during their upbringing. How strict were their parents? How did they get along with their siblings? What was expected of them to receive affection or to feel safe or validation as children? How much of their honest selves were permitted around the dinner table? Or did they even eat together at the dinner table? How much of themselves was expected to be suppressed in favor of the unity of the household comrades? I mean, really listen to the relational human experience that a well-adjusted adult had in their childhood. It tells you volumes. And then compare it with your own childhood without bias. Just observe it like a scientist taking notes, trying to connect the dots of how this may have led to that later in my life. And so I decided to do that. I decided to look at my own childhood without rolling my eyes and thinking it was silly. I mean, what's the harm, right? And let me tell you, this uncovered a lot to me about my automatic beliefs and reactions to love and relationships as an adult. And I highly recommend it to everyone, just to see why you love the way you love, where you're confident and where you're not. Growing up, I'd see my friends effortlessly walking up to girls and talking to them like a normal person, while walking up to girls for me was like walking up to Jesus. Also, I'd notice people come to terms with breakups pretty well. Compared to me, I stayed a mess for months, once or twice, nearly a year, before I was ready to date again. And I could never figure it out. I often gave myself the noble excuse of being too nice or sensitive or artistic and chalked it up to just being born this way, Everyone's different, I thought, until I decided to look into something everyone talks about, but seldom actually does. My childhood. Now, I'm not talking about using childhood as an excuse. I have contempt for those who treat people rudely and then use their childhood as an excuse and say things like, you don't know what it was like growing up with blah, blah, blah. Look, I don't care. No, what I'm talking about here is looking back at the snapshots of our childhood for notes on what could answer questions about why I keep screwing up in love the way I do, on the same autopilot way. For instance, what did safety and affection look like for you back then? And let me be clear, I'm not blaming my parents. I had a pretty good childhood. I had a lot of fun and freedom. But when I look back at my childhood through the lens of why I love the way I love now, what I expected from a woman and what I was trying to find, it became very clear. People must understand this. We automatically project our childhood definition of what love felt like to us onto our future relationships later in our lives, whether we realize it or not. Your attachment style later in life now is governed by your first attachment, typically as a child with your parents or guardians. For example, today, as an adult, if you're needy or insecurely attached with others in relationships, it's not because the adult in front of you likes it or needs it, but it's because your first caregivers, your parents, made you insecurely and needily love them to feel protected and safe. And so your default now is to project that early imprinting of what love is onto every new attachment you have as an adult, because that's what love and caring feels like to you from experience. Another example is if your parents were passive aggressive or shaming or cruel, and you never seem to do anything right in their eyes, you today may shrink and be ultra shy and bow and say sorry or yes dear, never speak up. You may not fully show yourself because you never think you're good enough. And the only thing worthy of love is what they tell you love is in order to be loved and taken care of. Does that make sense? Or another example in terms of what love looked like then to you as a child would be if you were in a loud family. I've seen this with Italians. I've gone out with an Italian girl once where they argue all the time and didn't give each other space. And then later, when you grow up, you might actually need and want a calm and stable partner. And you know it's good for you, but they seem boring. They need fire, or you end up arguing over irrelevant stuff because you want some sort of drama and noise in your love life because that's what felt normal to you in childhood. Our childhoods aren't just our first and most impactful ones. They're also the ones that are probably the longest, and for many people, they're the most meaningful relationships they'll ever have in their lives. Parents are gods in the eyes of children, and you listen to the tall gods in your house because your survival instinct is acutely aware of what happens if you don't behave the way the gods demand. So you submit and say the things that the gods want you to say and act the way the gods want you to act. So you learn to be obedient and formal and polite to remain in a relationship with those you depend on for food and shelter. And that looks and feels like love to you. And then you grow up and you really like someone and you automatically love that way again. I'll end this video with this question. Ask yourself, what didn't you get in childhood from your parents that you now chase as an adult to get approval or love, that makes you too open or too needy perhaps? Or conversely, what did your parents give you too much of that maybe makes you arrogant or rude or narcissistic? It's interesting to look back and without any shame, understand yourself a little bit better. For me, it's interesting as well, but it explained a heck of a lot. Anyway, something to think about. See you next time.